In the middle of September 2015, Joanne and I took a little trip down to Baltimore to join roommate Frank Denton on a tourist tour of the city. But on the way, we stopped at Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry, at the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers, is famous for John Brown's raid. But beyond the notoriety of this single dramatic event, its significance to American history is profound. This is September 13th, a Sunday in 2015, and we're at Harper's Ferry. And we're going to put in a few hours here and then go to Baltimore. And our whole trip has been made more interesting by a mutual error for which we are both responsible.
Hello, Laura. Mom doesn't have her suitcase with her. I can't believe it. We'll hit a store. I asked Dad not to take out my backpack and purse. And I guess my suitcase was farther into the kitchen. When all the lights went off in the house for us to leave the door, I didn't see it. Found out when we got here to Harper's Ferry and opened the trunk. Whoops, I didn't see it.
This is pretty historic, and I think of it as the scene of John Brown's raid, but it was also a scene of many Civil War battles. Park Service runs a shuttle down here to keep most of the traffic off these restricted roads. We're told this is a light day, but there are plenty of Tourons here. I'd like to see what it looks like on a heavy day.
Okay, you know, we're here just over the Shenandoah River, evidently, and I'd suggest we go up to Jefferson Rock to give us an overview of all of it.
Now, what this is the ruins of the Anglican Church from back in the day. It didn't survive as well as St. Peter's Catholic did. So Thomas Jefferson visited this viewpoint in 1783 and waxed eloquent and poetic about its scenic properties at the confluence of the Shenandoah and the Potomac rivers. We're looking up the Shenandoah, which is on the south side. There's the Shenandoah River below that Jefferson so admired, and here's his rock, which the Park Service has seen fit to shore up. I don't know what happened to it. Looking down river along the Potomac, there's a St. Peter's Catholic Church that was rebuilt in something like 1896, but was here during the Civil War. Here's the gravesite on this eminence, the gravesite of Robert Harper, who founded this place with only where there were only 3 settlements or 3 houses when he died in 1783. But he left land that he'd claimed for a cemetery that promised to be the burial place of a projected expanded community, because he recognized the industrial potential of all those river waters coming in from the Potomac and the Shenandoah. And the Potomac River going downstream, after it's been fortified by the waters of the Shenandoah on our right. Going downhill now, past the church, we could admire the track work, which has been here since long before the Civil War. Played a part in the Civil War and was used by both the Union and the Confederate forces from time to time. And this is the main, I guess, information center. We may pick up a ranger walk here. And indeed we did. This young man in a period costume held our attention for not an hour, but an hour and a half.
Others have to kind of pick and choose just because of the nature of it. If there's more you want to know about, ask me after the program. I will happily talk your ear off as long as I can.
Our docent is telling us here that the first European settler in this area called the Hole was one Peter Stevens in 1738. But he was squatting on land he didn't own. It belonged to Lord Fairfax.
Most of Virginia at the time belongs to a very, very rich Englishman who had never set foot in Virginia, named Thomas Fairfax. He also has a little title called Lord put in the front of his name, so he's Lord Fairfax, makes it very fancy. His son George would become a very good friend of George Washington's. They were later on neighbors. George did come to America. He and George Washington would go fox hunting all the time.
Here's the long and detailed story that this guide tells us. Fairfax discovers that he's squatting on his land and demands rent, but Stevens doesn't pay very regularly, and Fairfax doesn't take the time to come after him. Meanwhile, Stevens runs a very inefficient ferry until along comes Robert Harper, who falls in love with the place and offers to buy it from Stevens, who doesn't bother to tell him that he doesn't own it. But Harper pays up and thinks he buys the property. When he finds out that the title isn't clear, he offers Fairfax 8 guineas for it, and Fairfax makes the sale.
Well, Harper figures out, oh, this belongs to Lord Fairfax. Well, Harper had gotten a lot of money out of the Quakers building the church, so he contacts Fairfax and says, hey, I got rid of this Stevens guy. I've heard through the rumor mill he's kind of been giving you some problems. Can I just buy this land off of you for whatever you say? And for 8 guineas, which at that time was a decent amount of money. And I do not know the conversion rates into modern U.S. dollars. Just go with me, it was a decent amount of money. Fairfax sells the land to Harper and washes his hands of the whole, which has been giving him so much trouble.
George Washington insisted that an armory be built here at this remote spot where Harper had established a ferry, and there was very little else going on at the time.
So what you are sitting in now is what back then was called Arsenal Square, because right in front of you we have the small Arsenal building. This would have been a 2-story tall brick structure, and then to your right, the large Arsenal building, 3-story brick structure. These are where the guns that were made at the armory would have been stored. Construction started on these in 1799. The main armory, where the guns were actually made, the factory, that will also start construction in 1799. And we only have one building left from that, and it is not one of the original buildings, which is that one there. And I'm sorry to say it is not in its original location.
Our docent tells us about John Hall, inventor of the Hall rifle. More importantly, the inventor of the manufacture of interchangeable parts, thereby paving the way to mass production. And though most people don't know this, he did it before Eli Whitney and his cotton gin, and before, of course, Henry Ford. He even beat out the British in their famous Industrial Revolution. The British referred to his technique as the American manufacturing technique.
Anything that's handmade, oh, it's fancy, it's handmade, this is wonderful. Well, back then, everything's handmade. And also, it's all going to be slightly different, because one, human error, and each of us is going to have an ever so slightly different style when we do this. So no matter how careful you really are, there's still going to be a little bit of give and take. So if you have a screw that's meant for one gun, most of the experiments for this are being done for the military, so we're dealing with guns. If you have a screw for one gun, it may fit okay in another gun, but it's never going to fit just right. You're going to have some hot. But by and large, you're sitting there doing this by hand with the help of a few large hammers and bellows. Hall, you're sitting there with some levers and making sure everything is oiled properly. And the artisans here, they feel like Hall and his workmen are impeding upon their American rights. They're taking away their jobs. They are destroying their trade.
And it's ever thus with technological progress. But John Hall's manufacturing technique briefly grew Harper's Ferry to become the most significant manufacturing hub in the United States. You may wonder why, if Harper's Ferry was such a red-hot manufacturing area in the 19th century, it isn't now. The reason? Repeated floods. This is probably one of the places of most central interest here. It's the fire hall where John Brown held up against the Union forces led by Robert E. Lee for about a day holding hostages in here, but this place was overborne. And of course, in short order, he was taken to Charlestown to be tried and hanged.
This is the building where it all happens. Now, John Brown, our star for the moment, he is an abolitionist from Torrington, Connecticut. He was born May 9th, 1800. Which makes it really easy for the math challenge to figure out how old he is in a particular year. So in 1859, a very important year, he is 59 years old.
Speaking now of John Brown's raid.
So he has a whole bunch of these. He sneaks into town, grows the giant beard he's now famous for, starts calling himself Isaac Smith. One of his followers, a man named John Cook, actually marries a local, Maria Kennedy. Miss Kennedy has no idea about the raid, and they run a little shop in town. And Brown gathers 21 men to him, including 3 of his sons, Owen, Watson, and Oliver. And all summer of 1859, they're plotting, scouting the town, learning the routines of the night watchman at the armory, and making the final adjustments to their plan.
Our guide goes on to tell how John Brown and his men holed up in this so-called engine house for about 2 days until Lieutenant Israel Green and his platoon were able to batter down the door, free the hostages, and capture the raiders. We very much enjoyed our visit to Harper's Ferry, including the prolix presentation of our tour guide, and we deemed it a well-spent afternoon.